From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. As you already know, we're a couple of weeks away from Lori Lightfoot's inauguration and the seating of a city council that's pretty different looking than what we've been accustomed to. So it's a good bet that our new mayor is going to want to do things differently, but not so differently that she can be dismissed as a wild-eyed bomb thrower. And the list of crushing issues that Mayor Lightfoot's going to have to tackle is too long to list here, but near or right at the top is education. We've been hearing a lot about education reform for decades in Chicago, and while CEOs have come and gone, Peter Cunningham's been on the job behind the scenes somewhere for a whole lot of that time, mostly in Chicago, but he had a stint as Assistant Secretary for Education during Obama's term. And for about 5 years, he's been CEO of Education Post, an advocacy group he founded that publishes a daily newsletter on education issues. And then most recently, he popped up as manager of Bill Daley's mayoral campaign. And now, just having resigned from Education Post, I understand he's going to be devoting full time to his new startup carving miniature turtles from pieces of Lake Michigan driftwood. And we're happy to have him right here at the table today. How you doing?
I'm so glad I got my career figured out. I was kind of confused about that.
You weren't? No, yeah. Well, I read that in, well, I won't tell you where. And also joining us for another time here at the table is our very own producer, Dave Resnick, back. Dave?
Ken?
I'm not going to pretend like we're just saying hi to each other. We've been sitting here for a while working the show out, but how you doing?
Great to meet you.
All right, so we have a lot to cover today, and I thought maybe, Peter, what might be a unifying issue that we could talk about that would focus on almost everything that follows is the Tribune story today about the third year in a row that we're seeing really significant drops of population, not only in Chicago, but in Cook County, in Lake County, Cook County, DuPage. Is it true what our former governor was saying, that the taxes are just driving everybody out of Illinois?
I don't think that's true. It may be one factor, but there's a lot of other factors. Immigration has slowed down. That's one issue.
I think a really important one, yeah.
Birth rates are actually a factor. It's contributing to the under-enrollment in the Chicago public schools.
Yep.
Those are two factors. I think the third is one we talked about in the campaign. Bill talked about it a lot, which is just the emptying out of the South and West Sides, the African-American community. Right. At an alarming rate. It's about 400,000 fewer African Americans in Chicago today than in 1980. And I imagine there's a lot contributing to that, from crime to schools to lack of opportunities to just organic movement out to the suburbs, things that were not an option for urban blacks back in the 60s and 70s started to become an option in the 80s and 90s. So a lot going on there, and I think it's an existential threat, frankly, to Chicago, to see whole neighborhoods emptied out. And to Illinois.
Yeah, I
mean, but I guess one of the things that concerns me about that is it's not just an emptying out of Chicago's minority populations. It's an out-migration of minority populations from the region. Mm-hmm. And that's a concern because obviously, we don't necessarily want to dilute diversity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's so deeply ironic that this is happening at a time when at the federal level we're having this huge kind of insane discussion about building walls and keeping them all out. And I think I was surprised to see the Tribune, but the Tribune and the Sun-Times both did, I think, fairly eloquent editorials saying, wait a minute, we're not full. We're not full up. We're open for business. Come on in. Right.
India's got $1 billion plus. China's got $1 billion plus.
Yeah.
They're not significantly bigger than us. If anything, they're smaller. So, no, we're definitely not full up. And the world is growing, and Chicago should grow with it. Mm-hmm. When we were in the campaign, this past campaign with Bill Daley, we talked a lot about getting Chicago back up to 3 million people. It used to be 3.6 million, it's now 2.7. There has been an influx of whites, but the loss of blacks is, and the decline in growth in the Latino community are both contributing to essentially a flat population base. And I think that when you think about our problems in the city, from under-enrollment in the schools, emptying out of the schools, to extreme costs that are burdening us, some related to pensions, some of them just related to just debt, some of them related to just overspending. You know, increasing the population, increasing the size of the city, the activity is, you know, part of the answer.
Because the last thing you want to be doing is increasing taxes on a decreasing population. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Right. But some of this, I mean, whether you take a pro or con position on the graduated income tax, that is an attempt to address the gap that those who are more fortunate pay a greater percentage of the load. Obviously, I'm not endorsing it. I understand the merits and demerits. It speaks somewhat to what Peter's saying in people, I think, object to being taxed, but they especially object to taxes that they see as unfair or unevenly imposed. So,
well, I wanted to start with population because I think it's one of those things that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it really kind of underlies almost all the other conversations that we're having. Because if Chicago is going to be a consistently shrinking city at this point, then we're going to have to start dealing with some really huge questions about what do we do with these communities where there are only 2 or 3 houses left standing on a block. How do you deal with that?
You know, I think that you have to invest in them, and government has to step in and be the catalyst for it. The private market won't do it, won't go into Englewood and build housing when there isn't the population there to buy it. But if, you know, we talk about TIFs, we talk about government incentives, we talk about money, that's what money should be spent on, to take these neighborhoods that have good transportation. Englewood has good transportation. The West Side has 2 train lines out there, so there's no reason why those neighborhoods can't thrive and grow.
Transit-oriented development.
Transit-oriented development out there, but you're going to need government, I think, to step in and invest, build housing, make it affordable, and hopefully attract new young people.
So, how do you read the criticism of Rahm Emanuel then, since he's completed his 8 years? What's his record on those issues, on investing in underserved communities? I mean, it's everybody likes to say this. It's like during the Rahm Emanuel time, all they did was spend money downtown. Well, I don't think that's completely true, but what's your assessment of what really happened?
I think that, you know, you go where the water's warm, and there was a lot of interest in bringing corporate headquarters to here, and he's the right guy to do that. He was a good salesman for the city. You had areas like the near West Side where you had the right kind of buildings for the new tech world, and so you go where it's easier to start to move forward. I think that nobody's figured out what to do about struggling inner cities. We have them all over the Midwest. I wouldn't say nobody, but I would say that that's a challenge for everybody, and more often than not, the solution is artists and coffee shops. You see that, I've seen that in Detroit, I've seen that in Pittsburgh, kind of a tourist-based economy. I don't think that's what Chicago needs on the South and West Side. I think they need to bring back manufacturing. I think they need to keep the manufacturing that's here, invest in healthcare and education. There are certain industries that are lower skill, higher wage, like utilities. And I think that the mayor's office can be an aggressive force for steering that kind of stuff to those neighborhoods. And that's what I think really needs to happen.
But in that realm, government incentives, I mean, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that's TIFs. The purpose of TIFs is to help blighted areas. And yet we have all these pots of TIF money that aren't being used to address specifically what Peter said. There are large swaths of the city that look like a bomb's hit. There's no housing, there's no infrastructure that's in good repair, there's no nothing. There are pots of money that are supposed to be used for that purpose, to remediate those issues, and they're not, and they haven't been. I mean, we can love or hate Rahm Emanuel, but the man for whom both of you worked, I think, Mr. Daley, didn't do a heck of a lot better job addressing that issue. So to bring it to the present day, or what we say is the future, in a month we're going to have a new mayor. She has pledged that she will use that resource and other resources to help those populations. Is it a recipe that she's inventing? I mean, how is it possible, or will it be possible for this administration, with clearly a mandate of having 150 wards and decisively, and we imagine a city council which will be more favorably disposed to these sorts of bailouts, and I use the term not with any jaundice. What do we see happening in that regard, and what's her mandate, and what's her power structure that will be different than the two mayors that preceded her for the last 30 years?
I mean, I would say that one of the things about TIFs is that they don't work where they are most needed. Correct. Because there isn't much increment.
Good point.
So in the very worst
really
neighborhoods,
well where they're
they work really well where you have a lot of activity.
when you want to put new lights on LaSalle Street or something, boy, they're great at that.
Right,
Yeah.
and you know, it essentially became a funding source for all kinds of public improvements in places that were actually pretty good, okay.
That didn't need that much improvement.
Yeah, that didn't need that much, but they need something.
Yeah.
So, you know, you look at Lincoln Yards, the TIF money is mostly directed at the public investments, the streets, the infrastructure, the, you know, train stations, et cetera. But does it meet the but-for test? I don't think so. That neighborhood would probably develop one way or the other.
Oh, I would think so.
But maybe those infrastructure investments wouldn't be made, and so you'd have a lot more overcrowding and less traffic resolution than you will have under the plan right now.
One of the arguments that Rahm Emanuel has made over and over is that we don't, as Dave pointed out, we don't have this golden goose anymore in Washington. We're getting no federal money. We're getting no state money. We're out here on our own. And if we want to get a big glitzy project like this, which every city would love to have, you got to have them if you want to keep the city growing, and you can't get the infrastructure, well then this is a creative way of like investing in that infrastructure in the future. You say, well, how about you use your tax money in the future to pay for this? And you know, again, I always get caught in the cogs of this conversation, but when I hear people saying we're taking this money from the schools and putting it into high-rises in Lincoln Yards, that's not exactly what we're doing, because the schools will always get the amount of money that they ask for.
Yeah,
it's just that we'll all pay more taxes to pay for it.
Correct, correct. I think that, and I don't know how much Mayor-elect Lightfoot has said about this, but I think we need to reform the TIF program.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we need to find a way to get dollars from where they're being generated to where they're needed.
Yeah.
And right now, we're not quite there. It doesn't work quite like that. You can sort of do it. You can sort of do adjacent. You can move money to adjacent TIFs. Theoretically, you could change the borders so that, you know, the whole city was one TIF. Or I don't know what you could do.
Well, I believe the city council has oversight on the ordinance. So the ordinance can be changed, I won't say to the will of the mayor, but certainly to better accommodate those areas that are in need. I mean, it's a statute that was written by the city council, and it's one that can be amended by the city council.
But I think you just made the most important point of all in this whole TIF debate. Is it really, you can summarize it this way: TIFs have not been proven to work in the areas where they were intended to be used. They just don't work that well, because if there's nothing there, then you don't get the increment.
Correct.
Right. Tax increment financing.
Yeah. The other thing is, you hinted at this, which is the absence of an urban policy at the federal level since probably Lyndon Johnson. You know, real urban policy that really wants to look at cities and really wants to invest in them and really wants to analyze the, you know, structural problems there and what it would take to fix them. And you know, more and more people are living in cities today than ever before. Anybody with their head on straight knows that cities are the economic engines of America. I mean, Illinois without Chicago is hard to imagine, or Illinois even with a weaker Chicago is you know, not a good prospect. So, with the new Congress, with the new election coming up, I guess it's coming up, it's 18 months away or whatever, but with the new conversation underway, I think maybe we could start talking about urban policy again. And I hope we do, because we need to. Just as we need to talk about rural policy. I think we need to talk about both.
The agenda, though, needs to be formed comprehensively, and the scattershot method that we've seen, if you just look at infrastructure, for example, the roads and bridges, I mean, they're crumbling everywhere. They're not just crumbling in red states or blue states or maroon or purple states. They're crumbling throughout the nation. And the will to address that seems to be when we have a disaster. When a bridge collapses, when a viaduct, when something happens, then suddenly we wake up and we say, oh my God, everything's crumbling, what are we going to do? So speaking to Peter's point, there needs to be some group or groups, coalition of groups, who say with a degree of import, this has got to change.
Absolutely, absolutely. We need to, I mean, I don't understand why Trump didn't do this first. This should have been the first thing he did was an infrastructure plan. Democrats would have had to vote for it. He'd be cutting ribbons all the way through to Election Day. And the need is great. It's, it absolutely would have been a bipartisan victory. And instead he got so hung up on his wall and his politics that...
Well, at the moment that we're sitting here speaking, I guess it probably, I don't know, we're probably about 15, 20 minutes away from them actually hitting the button, the send button, and releasing the Mueller report to the world. And, who knows? I mean, I'm willing to just sit here and say there will be nothing in it that will be in any way harmful to Trump. And, I am just becoming so cynical. I just really believe he's going to get reelected. I don't think there's going to be any discussion of urban policy until probably after we're gone.
After 2024, you think?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the coalition that elected Barack Obama, women, minorities, and millennials, they're the ones added to sort of the traditional Democratic base. So the question is whether someone can put that together again. They're out there. The voters are out there.
Well, we saw the blue wave, but what I'm afraid of is that the blue wave is gonna turn sour, because it's just gonna feel like, oh, geez, we did this. We all went out. We voted all these people in, and nothing changed. Well, the House went Democratic, but they can't do anything either. So, I'm not gonna bother. I'm not gonna bother voting. This voting thing is overrated.
I read a story the other day that said that job growth has been faster in areas that supported Trump than in areas that didn't support Clinton. So obviously that would be helpful to him, but I'm convinced that many of the voters who came out for him, if they did a clear-eyed analysis, would realize that their quality of life isn't much better.
It would require a clear-eyed analysis, though.
Yeah. But I mean, how did they win? Under this president, I mean, the economy is still very fragile. It's been a fragile recovery, and it has not been a fulsome recovery for a lot of people. It's just been like a hanging on recovery.
And the administration has tried to politicize the Fed in ways that the Fed, love or hate the Fed. That process has despite the go-go stock market, I think that the underlying factors that Peter is referring to, there's a lot of skittishness.
There sure is. And that actually turns this thing a little bit to me. We are living in a country that is undeniably changing. I mean, demographically, politically, economically, in every way this country is changing. And I was wondering, you must have given some thought to the fact that you ran a campaign for a daily here in Chicago, and he got beaten. And there were some political reasons, and I'm sure there were things around the edges that you could have done differently if you had known and all that. But I'm wondering if the real thing isn't. I mean, just like Tony Preckwinkle got booted, there's just this kind of, I can't put my finger on it exactly, but this just yearning for something that's just completely new and different, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's not unique to this election. It's very, very common. It's certainly what elected Barack Obama in 2008. Change is almost a sure bet every time.
And Trump.
Trump.
My friend Axelrod often says people vote for a remedy, not a replica. So no question, Lori Lightfoot capitalized on the hunger for change. By my simple analysis, it seems to me like it was kind of a North Side revolution. I mean, they threw out Pat O'Connor, Deb Mell, Joe Moore. These are all people who've been around a long time, and they elected Lori. I mean, one of the things we, noticed is that, we thought Tony Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot were chasing a lot of the same voters. They were elected by very different voters.
Interesting.
So I kind of think it was like a North Side revolution to some degree, or a real statement of we want something different from the North Side, which again was Rahm's base to the extent that he had one. So
why? Why are they so? Why is the North Side so antsy and up for change, and the South and the West Side aren't?
I think it's kind of a political mystery. They're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that when we did a poll at the beginning of our campaign, we saw 61-27 wrong direction, right direction in Chicago. 61 wrong direction versus about 27. So really deep unhappiness. And the pollster who had worked with candidates in Chicago for 30 years said he'd never seen anything like that. So I just think that people feel like the city is not unified. It hasn't come together. And that's one of the things that always shaped Richard M. Daley's politics. He was elected on the heels of Beirut on the Lake, on the heels of council wars, and there was just this overwhelming yearning on the part of voters to bring the city together.
Yeah, I guess in a way he was a kind of a change candidate in his day, wasn't he? I mean, strange to say, but
and to some degree, I mean, the people were so frustrated by the the council wars and the vibe that the city was racially segregated and racially polarized, and they just wanted somebody to come along and. And Daley put a lot of work into rebuilding the relationship with the black community, and by the time he finished his last election, he won all 50 wards in 2007. And his base was the African American voters by 2007. He'd lost, in fact, a lot of the Northwest and Southwest Side kind of traditional, what we call white ethnic voters. So it's a fascinating city.
It is.
And anyone who thinks they got it all figured out, is wrong.
I've mentioned several times here. You and I both worked in the press office at about the same time.
Yep.
And I was in charge of the video unit, and we would go out with the mayor home every day. And I was never more fascinated than I was when I would see Daley go into a little community group in the church basement somewhere on the West Side. And these would be older people, but they're people who've lived in their neighborhood all their lives, and they loved him.
Yep.
They really did. And it's incongruous. You wouldn't quite think that would be the case. But now, but today, things are different. I mean, they're different again. It's a different kind of different, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying, but it just feels like something. Like exactly what you're saying, that there's just this thing about enough of this already. Bring somebody in here.
People were catalyzed by anger. I mean, I think that Peter alluded to that, but I think it's something that we need to bring into full relief. People were mad when they voted, and the anger was expressed by the throw them out attitude. And I think that Lori Lightfoot was a beneficiary of that. I mean, Tony represented the old way of doing things, the throw them out mentality that brought us Trump. Also, hopefully,
she says the same thing today, and the Sun-Times interviewed Tony, and that's essentially what she's saying: is that you couldn't be me.
You couldn't be me and get elected.
And win this election. It just wasn't going to happen.
Right, but I think that that's an interesting factor for us to consider because, I mean, Peter was speaking about the next national election. Will it be another case? I mean, certainly the blue wave that we referred to, part of that was throw the bums out. I don't know if that palpable anger can be harnessed, and the point that you made, Ken, what is the blue wave exhausted? I think as long as there's anger, it's not.
Well, we're going to find out. We will know that soon enough, I guess. So you have advised mayors. You've been in the position to advise mayors. You've been in the position to advise the Education Secretary of the United States of America. What would be the 2 or 3 things that you would tell Lori Lightfoot?
Around education or around other issues?
Just, you're going into office. Here's my premise. If Rahm Emanuel had it to do again, if it could go back to day one and do that 8 years again, I'm sure he would do a lot of things very differently. I assume he would, I don't know. Because lessons were learned, as they say, right?
Yeah.
You've been able to observe all of that. So Lori Lightfoot now has this opportunity to kind of rewrite the book a little bit. If you're just sitting down, just having coffee with her, what would you say? What would you say about the attitude, about the atmosphere of her administration? What should it be?
Well, I would first of all tell her to move quickly, because the honeymoon matters a lot, and she's got a lot of tough issues, and at some point very soon, if not real soon, then in the first year or two, she'll have to make some decisions that are going to be unpopular,
I'll say.
whether it's around finances or around policing or around education. So, I mean, the point I would make to her, broadly speaking, is that every city thrives on a strong middle class. And if you haven't created the conditions for the middle class to thrive, and for the lower classes to get into the middle class.
And for the people who strive to be in that middle
correct,
class.
Correct, the same thing,
right.
yeah. That for the lower class to climb that ladder into the middle class, then I think you have a problem. So I suggest she step back and ask whether the schools are meeting that promise, whether the economic activity is supporting that goal. Because if Chicago is becoming more of a haven for the 1%, that doesn't do, even though we know there's some 1%ers here in Chicago and they've done well, and that's fine. But if that's all you have, then you have a problem. So I would really encourage her to look at core middle class issues: job, home, healthcare, education, retirement. Ask yourself, are we creating the conditions that allow that to thrive? Because if we are, I think Chicago will be fine. And if we aren't, if we continue to lose people of color on the South and West Side, if we if we're not creating small business opportunities that are leading to larger businesses, if we're not making education a real pathway into the middle class, then I think we're going to have a problem. So I'd put that global frame on it, first of all, and then I'd ask her to identify a couple of top priorities. I think she was elected sort of on an anti-corruption platform. I mean, the Burke he wasn't indicted, but the Burke case has
charges
framed, I think, a lot of the conversation over the last couple of months, and she was well positioned to take advantage of that, and she did. But is that what everybody's worked up about? Is that your number one priority? Is it to solve the financial problems? Is it to solve crime? Or is it to reform the council, the corruption stuff? I don't know what that is, and I think that I would really, really press her to be very clear about what her top 1 or 2 or maybe 3 priorities are from the beginning, and I don't know what they are.
See, that's interesting to me, is that you also are not, you're not saying, I think education's number 1. I think policing is number 1. You're kind of equivocal yourself.
Like I said, I think restoring the middle class is the number 1 problem, not only facing cities, but states in the whole country. Giving more people a foothold in the economy, in a changing economy. I think that's the number 1 issue. But in Chicago, clearly crime is a top priority. I mean, by many indicators, our schools are doing better than they have been in a long time. They're still not where they need to be, but we are gaining faster than most other districts in the country. I don't think we have the same dynamic as we had 10 or 15 years ago when I was involved with Arnie here in Chicago. We're not creating more charter schools, for example. We have enough, and so we're not going to do more of that. I think the whole accountability framework has been worked out, so we're not going to really change that very much. And I think right now it's, the under-enrollment problem is a real one. We have 150,000 empty seats, and I don't think that there was a really honest discussion in the campaign about what we're going to do about that. You know, nobody wanted to say they want to close schools, and nobody wants to close schools. But you know, at some point you got to do something with all those empty seats, and you know,
that's a complicated case.
It's a complicated
because during your time, City of Chicago opened what, 150 schools or something?
Yeah,
right?
something like that. We opened about 150.
Yeah. So there are just too many schools.
We have too many schools.
Too many seats.
And not enough kids. I mean, like I said, the loss of kids there's a lot of factors contributing to that. Demographic ones, birth rates, slowdown in immigration. I mean, that's why during the Valis Chico era, the population rose. It was all because of immigration. It wasn't because the schools were so much better and the middle class was coming back. The percentage of students who are middle class in the Chicago public schools is unchanged since you know, Daley took over in '95. It's about 15%.
Since Willis, probably.
You know,
it goes back a long way.
It's about 15%. The percentage of white kids is roughly the same, 9 or 10%.
Yeah.
So in a perfect world, they'd bring back a lot of those kids who were in private and Catholic schools. In a perfect world, they'd slow the loss of African-American population and maybe even bring it back and create a new mecca for, you know, for young African-Americans who want to live in, you know,
in an urban situation.
In an urban community. In a perfect world, they'd get the crime under control and maybe make home ownership available at a lower cost to people, so that people would come back to those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So,
home ownership is one of the, again, to me, just one of those major keys. I mean, I bought a house in 1980, whatever it was, 86 or something, and it changed my life. It really did. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's suddenly, you've got this little piece of real estate that's yours, and you can kind of do what you want with it.
Right.
And then you start, you know.
and you get a tax bill also.
You get a tax bill, and then the next thing you know, it's, hey, get off my lawn.
Right. Right.
Well, anyway, I just think that we have we've got some real challenges ahead of us. So let's stay with education a little while, since you are the education guy. We kind of touched on this thing about having too many schools. What does a mayor have to do? You're going to have to close more schools, right? You're going to have
I think so, but
or at least mothball them or something. But when Rahm Emanuel closed his 50 schools, 90 or almost 89% of the kids who were affected were black.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was a political misstep of the highest order.
Well, I guess so, but I mean, it's reality. I mean, those neighborhoods are emptying out. So you have a lot more schools than you need.
In part because the schools were substandard.
Maybe. I think that was probably a factor. I think there were other factors. So you have to do something. So I just think there was, you know, people want to run from that issue. Willie Wilson wanted to reopen them all.
Right.
And
yeah.
Susanna Mendoza wanted to convert them all into community centers. That's many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. Lori Lightfoot, for about 5 hours, wanted to make them police training academies.
Right.
Backed off of that.
Maybe there are other public uses for them. Maybe there's, you know, halfway houses. Maybe we can come up with all kinds of ways to use them.
Yeah, but those become NIMBY issues. I mean,
Yeah,
halfway
they
houses
sure do.
are, you know, everybody wants one, but nobody wants them in their backyard.
Right, I actually have one right across the street from me. I live on Logan Boulevard, and there's one right across the street from me. And I was remarking to my wife the other day that, you know, there's like no issues because of it. There's these guys, they're old guys. They're old guys. They sit outside on a, you know,
On their plastic chairs,
on
right.
their plastic chairs, and they don't bother anybody. So, so I think that the under-enrollment issue should not dominate the conversation around education. It's a problem, and if you don't want to solve it, you'll be inefficient. It is not a problem that's going to sink the district, so to speak. It's just a waste of money, and it's to have many under-enrolled schools, and it's symptomatic of larger issues. So I think the opportunity for Mayor-elect Lightfoot and Janice Jackson, who I hope will stay in that job because I think she's terrific, is to come up with, you know, academic innovations that take things forward. The big area to me that is ripe for change is what used to be called vocational education. It is now called career and technical education.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that could be huge.
Proud graduate of Prosser myself, so
Okay.
so I know about that. And I mean, you know, don't get me started on that. Sorry, Dave, I stepped on you. I know you were going to say something, but just quickly, I went there in the 60s, and it was really substandard. It was really not a good education. I mean, the trades that they were teaching were trades that had died in the 50s or in the 40s. Right. And what you really need to be doing is getting kids in and getting them excited about jobs that you can you know, with your hands. Yep. And that's a big challenge, and I totally agree with that. If you could get 4 or 5 of these kind of real thriving academic centers throughout the city, you would have kids lining up to get into them. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, the other sort of related. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
No. I mean, there's been a fair amount of reporting recently about Prosser, and they're sinking a ton of money into it. And one of the programs that
I was surprised, $12 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the programs that they were nibbling around in terms of conversation of eliminating was the auto repair program. Yeah. And the argument from the principal and others in the district was, well, maybe that's not the skill set that is most in demand. And I acknowledge that that's probably true, but one of the things that Mayor Emanuel did was he pretty much fundamentally changed how city colleges worked and turned them into largely vocational training centers. Yeah. Reports are mixed on whether that's really been effective and whether the cost of that turnaround, if you will, that reimagining was really as effective. And I want to make sure that CPS looks at that and understands that if you build it, they will come attitude may not absolutely pertain in this situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact is enrollment in city colleges is way down.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and the people who are chasing an education in those fields that are not vocationally oriented are having a heck of a time because they're having to go from one side of the city to the other just to satisfy the basic core curriculum of those non-vocational programs.
One of the ideas we proposed in the campaign was to merge city colleges and CPS and basically give everybody the chance to just continue their education for 2 more years. Yeah. You know, I think Ram's STAR program is a pretty good one. Mayor Emanuel's STAR program is a good one. There's a trend all around the country to offer community college level courses to more and more kids. It's dual enrollment, it's dual credit, it's, you know, people graduating from high school with an associate's degree. All of that, I think, is a great trend, and it was good to see Chicago leading it, and I thought we could even take it further. Yeah.
We'd have to drop it there, I'm afraid, but Peter, it's been great having you on the show. I've really enjoyed having you here, so thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Good luck in whatever you do end up doing after this. We'll probably read about it in the paper, I'm sure.
All right.
And to that guy, he's the producer of the show, David Resnick, and I'm Ken Davis, and we'll be right back here on Chicago Newsroom. It's Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis, and whenever you see a battle to save a little patch of prairie or a piece of forest in the Chicago area, or see neighbors getting together to reclaim a weed-choked vacant lot, or just get some trees planted in our incredibly stressed urban forest, any of these cases, you'll probably find that Openlands was involved in some way. They've been around since, I think, the early 60s, long before the modern environmental movement was born. They advocate for and defend open lands. I don't know if I'm right about this, but my sense is that open lands are really under stress right now. There's more than, well, you know, just the usual pressure to pave over everything that's left with very little appreciation for the benefits of green space. And that's why we've invited Jerry Adelmann to the table today to give us a status report. Jerry's the longtime head of Open Lands, and it's a pleasure, Jerry, to have you right here at the table to talk about Open Lands.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here.
We've known each other for quite
a long
while.
time. We go way back.
Long time. How long have you been at Open Lands?
Well, I've been the CEO for over 30 years. I'm going to my 31st, a long time. And I started way back.
You just seem to have always been there, you know?
Well, as you say, you know, we were formed in 1963. And we were one of the first conservation organizations in the nation to focus on a large metropolitan area. So our kind of footprint, I mean, people know us about our work in Chicago, which is intense and has been throughout our history, but we cover northeastern Illinois and parts of Indiana and Wisconsin. So I have been head of the organization, though, for a little over half of its time.
Yeah, half its
but it had an illustrious history before.
Yeah.
Smaller group,
Yeah.
but has grown and evolved. And, you know, people are at the heart of our mission. We were formed by the Welfare Council of Metropolitan Chicago, a group that kind of morphed into the United Way. So while we care deeply about the land itself in all its forms, this kind of web of green from you know, community gardens or small green spaces, green school campuses, to Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge or Medewan National Tallgrass Prairie, but we also care about people having access to that, and we feel nature is vital to everyone. It should be close to where they live.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because, you know, we think about the environmental movement and everything, but there's a kind of a personal level to what you do. You deal with individual community organizations that want to plant a community garden, or like I said, just plant some trees or something, because that's what you have. That's what you have to do in an urban environment.
Yeah, I mean, if you're...
It's so different.
Totally. And so 80% of Americans now live in metropolitan areas, half the world.
We were just having this conversation.
Oh,
with
really?
Peter Cunningham.
Fascinating.
I mean, about this is where the populations are.
It is. And so if we can't connect people to nature where they live and help them understand better the issues they're facing, and in turn become then stewards and advocates, what's the future of our planet? It's pretty bleak. So our work as a metropolitan conservation group is, I think, even more critical than ever. But we always work with community, even if it's out in the ex-urban fringe, you know, working with farmers and small communities and so forth, or in Chicago neighborhoods. But if you're going to sustain it, you know, people have to care, they have to own it, they have to understand it, and get involved.
And that's really the tricky part, is sustaining. I mean, it's one thing to get 5 or 6 people who are hot about something for a month or two, and you know, they'll get a little money and they'll do a little project, and you go back a year later and it's just not there because you have to have this kind of constant input of energy.
So that's, well, one of our founders said early on, you have to save a site at least 3 times.
That's so true.
Because there are always threats and
That
issues and
is
things.
so true.
And so as a regional land conservation group, place-based, we're not going away. Our footprint has gotten bigger because the metropolitan area has gotten bigger. But we're here for the long haul. And so consequently, you know, we have to have strong partners at the community level. And that's how we do our work. You know, without meaningful, authentic community engagement, it's not going to be sustained. You know?
Yeah, I noticed this morning in, I think, Chicago Magazine, there's a story about a dust-up going on at North Park Village about a couple of school organizations there, and the residents around them aren't happy about it. And it just got me thinking about how, I mean, I remember the debate over North Park Village because I was a student at Northeastern in whatever that was, 67, 68, when that huge battle was going on because Harry Chaddock or some developer wanted to, you know, build a mall there, which would be interesting today, wouldn't it? If they cut it all down and built a mall, and the mall would be empty, and there'd be, you know, there'd be a bunch of empty stores. Nobody knows what to do with it. But it was organizations like yours that just stood up and said, "Hell no, this is not going to happen. This is a piece of open lands in the middle of a city, and we're going to keep it that way," and it worked.
It did. It was an amazing story. And it illustrates in many ways how we operate, because we didn't do it alone. We did it because there were these concerned citizens passionate about it. They turned to us and we supported them. And in the end, we're able to get a conservation easement on the property. The first time in the country that a unit of government, a municipal government, had transferred development rights to a not-for-profit. So it's pretty significant.
Right?
Yeah,
I guess
that was really extraordinary.
I know
and
it was.
The last
really,
year there was one proposal after another to put shopping centers and housing and this, and the last was, I think, another shopping center under Mayor Byrne. And people said, "This is it. You know, we can't keep fighting these battles."
We just fought this fight.
Right.
So you have to do it 3 times.
So permanent protection is really important. It's part of the fabric of our communities and our region. With climate issues that we never even spoke about 25, 30 years ago, it even adds another layer of significance. And where's all the stormwater going? Where's the carbon going?
So true.
You know, what about cleaning our air? What about habitat? You know, we know the health benefits of access to nature, huge. Early childhood development, all these things that are now increasingly being documented. And they're tied to nature, they're tied to parks, they're tied to natural areas, they're tied to gardens and green space. So we even have better arguments today to make about the value and the importance of it, not least of which is economic. I mean, if we're competing, you know, with LA, with New York, with London, you know, with Beijing for business, for talent and so forth, I mean, younger generation, they want access to nature, they want recreational opportunities, they want clean, livable environment, clean air.
It's interesting. I just, these are just like random thoughts that just keep occurring to me, but I've been following this debate over the Quentin Road expansion, which, you know, we only cover the city here, but here you've got a really beautiful piece of forest preserve land with a 2-lane road running through it, and the plan is to expand it to a 5-lane road or something. Anyway, the point being that the community opposition to it is fierce, and there is some possibility that there'll be a compromise. You probably know more than I do about it.
Well,
but anyway, my point is just that this is what can happen when people organize.
So exactly. So Deer Grove, this is the first forest preserve in the system. You know, the Cook County Forest Preserve was the first major comprehensive, you know, open space system in the country. They celebrated their 100th anniversary a couple of years ago. Openlands worked with them to facilitate the creation of what they call the next century conservation plan, you know, stepping back and saying, you know, things have changed. Let's be consistent with our mission and vision, but, you know, changing demographics. You know, we have totally different kinds of populations living here. What are their interests, needs? Climate, never considered before. Changing economic considerations, whole range of things. So we help them develop the plan and now working on implementation. And we also have done extensive ecological restoration at Deer Grove. So this is a very special place historically, and the scale of it and the kind of birds that are coming back and the thousands of people who enjoy it and so forth. So we have been very involved in those discussions. I haven't been personally, but my senior staff have, and looking at alternatives. And you know, you can design roads to meet the needs that are there without over-engineering them, and you know, be sensitive to the land that's adjacent to them, and we have to be, because forest preserves and parks are often seen as the course of least resistance. You know, we need a site for a new school, we need to widen a road, let's put in a hospital, you know.
It's just like a land bank.
Yeah, exactly.
Casino. We'll build the casino right there. Look, there's nothing there, just a bunch of trees.
Well, you know, we never had zoning for our parks before. And Mayor Daley's Nature and Wildlife Committee showcased this. They did first with Department of Planning and Development, and then later with the Department of Environment. And well, one of the things we ought to do is have a zoning category that says this isn't just land waiting to be developed, this is open space.
We won't get into this one, but sometimes these things become so controversial that the green space argument kind of takes a back seat, and I'm thinking, of course, of the Obama Library.
Right.
I mean, this is one that, wow, I found myself really getting caught in the switches on this one myself, because my immediate knee-jerk reaction was, oh no, you're not going to take 1 square inch of that historic park. You're not going to cut down 1 tree for this. And then you go into the community meetings, the neighborhood meetings, and it's an entirely different thing. They don't see that park as being this green oasis. They see it as being the place where they want their shrine to Barack Obama. So yeah, you're right. Population stresses are different
Cultural
in different
changes,
places.
you know, and how we use parks, how we think about them. But we just recently adopted a strategic plan, and a couple of the kind of pillars in it. I mean, one is nature-based solutions to climate. You know, the climate is huge. It's facing the planet in a way that no other crisis has probably in the history of the planet. You know, it's our very survival. And we're kind of saying, we're a conservation group, what are we doing, you know? Well, we realize we're doing a lot. People don't talk about the nature-based piece of it. But by having functioning ecosystems that are absorbing lots of carbon and lots of water, you know, that's part of the solution. 35% of carbon sequestration can be addressed through nature-based things. rebuilding, restoring, maintaining the urban forest, huge. We have this wonderful program called Space to Grow with total transformation of school campuses and building and green, all these things. So we realize we're doing it, we don't talk about it, you know.
Yeah.
But then the other side is the advocates. And so we work always with community, but often on isolated projects, a community garden, a green of a school campus, plant. How do we engage the communities in thinking more broadly about the environment, environmental literacy, if you want, that they become advocates and spokespersons, you know. And so that's all part of this, you know, engaging youth and diverse populations that maybe have felt this wasn't part of their experience, or that they weren't welcome, or it was different people making decisions. No, we all have to. But then you get into complicated issues like the Obama Foundation.
Well, this is why it's so interesting to talk to somebody with your longevity in this, because, you know, we're both...
We've been around a long time.
Yeah, we've been around for a while. We've seen... It's always so interesting. I've said that one of the few benefits of growing old is that you get to see the cycles.
True.
You get to see how these things come and go.
Good, bad, and whatever.
Good and bad. But, you know, there have been, right now, one of the things that's on my mind, having just lost the green ash in front of my house, and I was on Facebook the other day whining about the fact that 94 trees were cut down on the within 2-block radius of my house in the last year.
Because of sewer or
green ash.
Emerald ash.
Emerald ash borer. And this is the thing about, you know, boys and girls, learn the lesson about monoculture. Don't plant the same trees, right?
You're in all the elms, and then what do we do? Ash and locusts. Now there's something's going to come probably for that.
I guess it was just before my time. When I got there, all the trees were about this big around, and now they got to be this big around, and now they're cutting them all down. This is urban forestry, and urban forestry is a major issue for a city like Chicago. And it's my observation that urban forestry in Chicago right now is pretty much in a crisis. I think our canopy is down.
We have one of the worst canopy covers of any large city in the country, and then the loss, especially, I mean, 16, 17% of the trees on public lands, parkways and boulevards, you know, ash. So that's huge. And almost all of them are going to die, you know. Tragically. But also we don't have really good policies in place, and it's a concern. There's some talk that we've lost tens of thousands of trees in the last 8 years, net loss. My organization cares deeply, as you know, about the urban forest, not just in the city, but also throughout the region, in this partnership with Martin Arboretum and others called the Chicago Region Tree Initiative, looking at the 7-county area, but just in the city alone. So just kind of a little history, but back pre-Mayor Daley, under Mayor Byrne, and she did some really good things. She was the first one to focus on the river, quite frankly, and put in place some minimal but first guidelines. But on the urban forest, she wasn't very good. She slashed the budget. Professional people left. There were no policies in place. We did a study, and we documented that there was a net loss of 100,000 trees over a 10-year period in the city. Some of that was Dutch elm, but just also because we weren't planting live and healthy trees, and we weren't maintaining the ones we have.
And parenthetically, if you look at some of the suburbs neighboring Chicago, which had the same kind of elm cover, they still have some of them alive today.
They do.
Because they were able to, they maintained them.
Exactly.
And Chicago just didn't. They just let them die.
So we started a program called Neighborwoods. You may remember this, pre-Daley. Doing plantings in many of the Chicago neighborhoods, about 2/3 of them. Not to replace what the city and park district should have been doing, but rather to engage people in understanding the role of trees collectively as a forest, health benefits, environmental benefits, economic benefits, all these things. Mayor Daley got elected, read about one of them. It was in the paper about a community-based planting. Called us up, had a meeting. He asked all these questions. Why can't I get, you know, trees on Lakeshore Drive? They were redoing it. He said, well, you can, but, you know, it's hostile, and you understand the conditions, salt and wind and a planter, on and on. He hired Edith Macra, who was our urban forester, shortly after that meeting to launch Mayor Daley's Green Streets. We stepped back and said, you know, this guy says he's going to plant 500,000 trees. I don't know if he will or not, but we don't want to have happen what did in LA. Million seedlings for the Olympics, and 3 years of drought, and 80–90% died. So we launched Treekeepers. It's now 27 years old. It's extraordinary. Over 2,000 people. You know. Are you a tree keeper?
Number 119.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And you know, we now moved into planting trees. We never did, as you know, other than to teach people. It was always about tree care.
Yeah.
But because the city hasn't been doing much, so we planted about 6,000 trees in the past several years. But yeah, trees are our first connection. I mean, as you say, outside your house, if you live in an apartment building, you don't have a yard.
Yeah.
You have a tree in front of your house, hopefully. So they're critical from an environmental point of view, from a climate point of view, but they're also critical in terms of being the point of entry for many people into understanding or caring about nature.
I think that's true.
Yeah, yeah.
And my observation has been that, at least in the community where I live, a lot of trees come down and they don't want people to replace them because they don't like to rake leaves, and they want the
say
sun.
that this, you know, the roots are getting in the sewer. Well, they're getting into the sewer or into the water, maybe because it's broken.
Right.
It's not the tree's fault.
The tree doesn't, ladies and gentlemen, the tree doesn't break the sewer. If the sewer is leaking, its roots will find that, and then they'll get in the sewer.
But you've got
Keep
a problem
that in
with
mind.
the sewer.
Right.
Address that. Don't kill the tree.
Address the sewer. Don't kill the tree. But yeah, my sense of it has been in the last, well, I don't know how long, but recent years, you can just call up 311 and say, I want my tree cut down, and they'll come out and cut it down.
Well, I don't know if it's that simple, but there are
it's been that way with
countless
some of my
cases.
neighbors.
I know it has been. It's been a huge problem, and so these are things that during the transition period here that we and many others are trying to address. This is critical. I mean, if we're trying to position ourselves as one of the great cities, you know, in terms of being a world leader on climate and other things, and then we're not even maintaining our forests and we're cutting down live and healthy trees, something's wrong.
It really is.
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned Treekeepers. I think it's worthy just to mention here that Jim DeHorn, who was the guy who ran your program for many, many years, passed away. And there was a beautiful memorial for him up at North Park Village.
It was very powerful.
And
I didn't count the people, but what were there? I mean,
well, I took pictures and
60,
I was able
100,
to.
I don't know,
No, I counted
150?
at least 150 people in the pictures.
It was
that I took.
impressive. Yeah,
so
it was impressive.
Great.
He touched so many people and inspired them, and brought with him this passion for trees, love of them. That just it was contagious.
He was great to be around.
An old union organizer, tough guy. Don't confront him, you know.
Right.
But yeah, wonderful guy, and it was so moving. It was like a reunion too, because so many of you early tree keepers were there with more recent, and it was really a powerful, beautiful day. Snow came the next day.
Yeah.
We planted a ginkgo, which was his favorite tree.
But it's not natural.
As I know, although he would have argued, though, 150 million years ago it was native. It was here. So no, it was very beautiful.
Well, hey, listen, keep up the fight, will you?
Absolutely.
We count on you for another 30
count
years?
on you?
Oh, yeah.
Too?
Can we count on you for another 30 years at Openlands?
Well, not as the head of it for 30, no. A few more years, definitely. And we're thinking of succession and so forth, of course, too. But I'm there for a while. I want to see this plan through if I can.
Oh, yeah, you gotta keep.
But I have a great
Lightfoot
staff, a great board,
administration.
and most importantly, the partners that we have in communities in the city and throughout the region. Other organizations, block clubs, individuals, local government. That's how it's going to happen.
And it has, and it's worked very well, and I congratulate you for it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I don't know, are you a membership organization? Can people be members?
Yes, they can. And website, openlands.org. You go on there. Thank you. You'll get our newsletters, alerts, and all sorts of good things. Yeah.
It's worth it. It's
we have
really worth it.
activities. Yeah, we would welcome that. We need it. We need to
A
broaden our
not-for-profit
base.
organization.
There you go.
All right, Jerry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken.
Jerry
A real pleasure.
Adelmann is the CEO of Openlands here in Chicago, and we're grateful for his time here today. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a presentation of Chicago's CAN TV, another not-for-profit organization worthy of your support. And we will be back next week. We're going to get into some really deep issues over the next couple of weeks, so buckle your seatbelt, and we will see you again then. Don't forget, you can go to this address to see all of our past programs, and thanks to Dave Resnick, of course, as always, for producing our show. See you next week. Bye.